As always, it's important to start off by saying this video is not meant to advocate or glorify any of the following behavior, and it is more so intended to act as an educational exploration on substance abuse and altered states of consciousness as a whole. Please do not attempt to recreate anything that is discussed in this video. Like last time, we'll be going over certain trips that can definitely ruin people's sense of reality. However, instead of DMT, this time I figured it'd be interesting to go over things like magic mushrooms, because even though they are nowhere near as hallucinogenic, the experiences that certain people have had are definitely traumatic. I wanted to jot this down while it was still relatively fresh. Last weekend, I took about 4.8 grams of shrooms. They were quite old, so I thought they might have gone off, and I figured about 4 to 5 grams would be the equivalent of about 2 to 3. For the first hour or so, I didn't feel much, and I figured I was right. But I started hugging this weight that I sometimes use for working out, and I realized that the weight of disappointment was holding me back, a kind of dead weight that was sticking. I know it's not exactly the most profound insight, but things got really crazy from here. As I was lying on my couch, I realized that my hand was no longer there. In fact, hardly any of my arm was. I had a feeling that I could change space and reality just by willing it so from here, and I became convinced that all my hair had fallen out, my teeth had fallen out, or were in the process of falling out, but for some reason, none of that really mattered to me right now because I could just rearrange everything to go back. I remember thinking I could just step out of the window and fly smoothly to the ground if I wanted. Fortunately, I didn't listen to this idea. I'm not even really sure I possibly was going to do this or if I was just in my head, which is kind of scary looking back. I think I got an insight into what it would feel like to have a real psychotic break, losing my link to reality. I felt as if I was in the same world as Van Gogh and all those other artists whose own seeking had eventually led them into madness. I just felt like nothing was real, but that I had found the answer. It was just a really bad answer. The world was pointless. It was a joke that means nothing. I realized that the reason people are living more and more of their lives online is they sense at some deep level everything is fake. So why shouldn't they construct an easier, less messy virtual reality? I felt our civilization had been through this process before, many times, rising and falling. Certain things and coincidences were common throughout civilizations, such as fascination with teeth. I was clearly obsessed with teeth during this trip, numbers, and gold. And these commonalities were the archaeological fragments of previous attempts at deciphering the reality code. So many people had an inclination that something wasn't right, studied, thought about it, and the moment they figured it out, they supposedly went mad. But actually, they were just transported to this endless space outside of reality where they just lived forever. The thing was, there wasn't a point to existence, so the people who had actually escaped the reality weren't trapped in some kind of meaningless hell. Instead, they were stuck in a void where they couldn't die. They had to invent their own reality to get out of it. And that's how all new worlds and universes are created. These people had become gods of their own new worlds, everything in that world out of their heads. I felt like I had the opportunity to reach this level, but I would have to die. I was then blasted through thousands of instances of my life. Each one, I had to decide whether to die. In some, I did, and I made sure I apologized to all of my loved ones in those realities, sending them infinite love to make sure they knew it was not their fault I had chosen to die. I had the choice to die in this realm, and that possibility was just there, death. But I just couldn't do it. I didn't have the courage to see what was really over the other side because I knew I might well not be able to come back. I was quite sure that I wouldn't actually die, or that death didn't mean whatever I thought it meant. And even if it did, if we all really just die, then it couldn't really be all that bad if you just stop existing. Why would that even be a bad thing? It's just the absence of something, not anything negative, but taking that leap into the unknown is scary. After I had decided not to die, I was left with the feeling that this life is actually kind of amazing, but also somehow a weird dream. I remember floating over the earth and just being delighted that some people, had managed to dream up and create together Paris, jazz, ancient Greece, all of those indigenous cultures who really knew how to live and be fully in this world. I met up with some friends and we just floated over the world, contemplating the beauty of this life. sometimes even the great inventiveness and collective wisdom of the people in it. But since then, I've been quite depressed and detached. Modern reality seemed and still seems like we are living a collective dream in which we're kind of begging the planet, reality itself, to just end, just to prove that it was all a pointless waste of time, so that way we can't get blamed for squandering everything. I don't exactly regret this trip, but I do not recommend doing this much shrooms on your own. The thing about feeling like I could shape reality and just take body parts out and put them somewhere else was kind of freaky, and since I was on my own, I don't know if I really was just in a ball on the floor. Something bad could have happened. I could have jumped out of the window. In terms of whatever message the mushrooms were trying to tell me, I think this kind of pessimism or deep ambivalence to my life is something I've carried with me for a long time, and it's been weighing me down. Maybe the shrooms were trying to give me a picture of what this might actually look like, but when I realized everything was pointless and I just felt like Van Gogh or some other artist just trapped in this infinitely creative hell, I realized it's not all that bad. Because if you could just kind of sink, like as in a kind of wormhole of infinite light and beauty and, just keep sinking forever, that's actually quite beautiful if you think about it. I have a new sense of the fact that I'm gonna die, and this might not be anything to be scared of. I might not be able to come back, but I'll go somewhere else. I think most young people don't have time to think about death a lot, so I feel like this was a useful realization. Life is there to be lived, so live it. This week, I had my first ever bad trip on 3 grams of golden teacher, which was mistakenly a way too high of a dose for someone my size. I'm short, slim, and female, and I've done mushrooms maybe 7 times before, but only usually around 2 grams. A month prior, I had partaken of the same shrooms, but it was only about 1.5 of the exact same batch. But that time, they had been picked and dried only a few days prior and still held a bit of water weight, which was my first dosing mistake. The experience the first time was very mild, only some saturation of colors, and just a pleasant time nonetheless. So this week, when I chowed down on 3 grams of the same, now condensed and bone-dry golden teacher, I really did not know what I had in store. My set and setting were ideal, in a familiar sunny forest park where we have tripped before, with my partner and 3 close friends. An actual dream scenario. I was feeling hopeful. Just rocked a job interview earlier in the day, spring was coming, nature was alive, and friendship is magic. Everyone else took a tab of acid, while I consumed the mushrooms alone, thinking, stupidly, that I was making a smart move, as I had work the next day, and wanted the experience to be shorter than a full acid trip. I normally go low and slow on substances after some bad experiences. I don't drink alcohol, and I do smoke weed maybe more or less daily. But that day, I was just excited and just wanted the trip to happen quick. So I ate the whole dose at once, and yikes. A quick lapse in judgment is all it really takes. The upswing of the trip was adventurous and beautiful. The whole forest was alive in a kaleidoscope of colors. We were jumping over streams like a fantasy video game. I was starting to connect with an omnipotent energy that I had met once before on a shroom trip, where I felt like I'd been given brief access to an encyclopedia of the universe, with an answer available to anything I wanted to ask. I was excited to get to this place again, though I remember this entity telling me last time mushrooms shouldn't be abused to tap into this magical plane too often. About 20 to 30 minutes after first seeing the effects, I soon started to disconnect from my body. I couldn't tell if I was standing or sitting, even when my eyes were open. I started to freak out a bit and felt I couldn't keep standing, so I tried to sit on a log. I communicated to my partner that I thought I was starting to have a difficult psychedelic moment, and I started to panic because I was not understanding what was happening. I had no idea the trip was going to be this strong, and descended into an ordeal that was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. I always thought a bad trip was when you start seeing scary snake people coming out of the ground or something like that. I didn't realize it could just so strongly be an emotion. Just gray, hot, pure terror. Fear with no visuals, just monochromatic light. No auditory hallucinations, no crazy thoughts. Illogical, yes, but not fantastical. Just lying on the ground, completely unable to move, while 100% conscious and aware. Intense panic rocking every cell, and all you can do is hang on for dear life. My friends were luckily there to support me, despite tripping themselves. But those 2 hours where I was lying on a dark forest path, unable to get up, and thinking I might be having a stroke or brain aneurysm, convincing myself I absolutely have something medically wrong and I need to go to the hospital, those were some of the most frightening moments I have ever experienced in life. I considered death, and I had pretty much accepted it. I felt sad for my family and my partner. The desire to slip into unconsciousness was strong. I was demanding my friends call an ambulance, which they eventually did. The medics on the phone were able to discern I wasn't in any immediate danger, having not consumed any other drugs or alcohol, wasn't puking, and had no physical pain or convulsions. They were so unconcerned we were put in a queue for an ambulance. I was certain at this point I would have to be carried out of the forest in a stretcher, placed alternatively in the ER or a loony bin, given sugar, sedatives, or fluids of any kind to make this ordeal stop. Passing joggers had paused to help too, as I was obviously having a bad time. I just kept holding on, lying on the concrete path and waiting for flashing lights or medics to arrive. Any moment now, I thought, but they never came. This only added to my despair. I had felt so abandoned and helpless. Now I'm kind of glad they didn't come and understand that due to the pressures of COVID, their resources were kind of limited. We were in a difficult location to get to, and I just was not a top priority patient. Still, knowing that in the moment nobody's arriving to help you was excruciating. At one of the worst moments, grasping at any mental coping mechanism I could, I started thinking about all those animal videos where people find tiny abandoned baby animals and rehabilitate them. I thought if those orphan newborn raccoons could fight for their lives and survive, so could I. A breaking point did happen though, when a wave of sadness and grief finally washed over me, and I was howling and crying uncontrollably in a way that could only be described as primal screams. By this point, it was fully dark, and the sky was full of stars. A very low, thin crescent moon peeked through the trees. I wailed like never before, lying on the ground, the sound coming from somewhere deep and ancient, like years of pain being released at once. It was cathartic and helped me understand my condition was brought on by psychological pain rather than medical emergency. The howling happened a few more times, and despite the day being good, I must admit, I have been dealing with long-term PTSD and mental health issues, recent events in the news bringing everything even more to the forefront, and I accepted that this may just be my mind getting too overcome with the intensity of it all. The moment I started to recognize my feet as belonging to me again was a huge relief. I was able to sit up, and eventually we started shuffling down the path out of the park. I was supported on both sides, but with every passing moment as I was returning to my body, slowly, I felt extremely fragile and just in shock. We were still in the ambulance queue, but eventually I started feeling like a busy ER during a pandemic is not the place that I wanted to be, and I finally felt okay enough to just go back to our friend's house in a taxi. They ran me a lovely bath, and we finally updated the docs again to say no ambulance was needed, but we would still stay in touch in case anything worsened again. We spent the rest of the night watching some silly films, and I mainly napped, but I was really glad my friends were able to wind down a bit after this ordeal as well. I still felt delicate the next day, but with every passing moment, as I contextualized the experience as a bad trip, honestly, the experience was really helpful. I feel a newfound sense of appreciation for being present in my body. I normally toked every day to cope with the anxiety and droll of lockdown life, but I've had no desire to do so since then. I've learned a big lesson in proper dosage, and the experience didn't put me off of mushrooms or psychedelics forever. But my naivety/honeymoon phase with the drugs are over. Just for a little backstory, I was supposed to get married this Friday to the love of my life. He called it off a week before the wedding, and now we're broken up. I have been completely heartbroken, so my mind was already not in the best place. Also, for context, I'm a very strong Christian, and I don't know many other Christians who have done shrooms before, so I just wanted to share my experience. I had already planned on trying shrooms, but I thought now would be a good time since I was already going through a lot of change. I bought about 4 grams and took like 2.5. I decided to do it completely alone, and this was my first time ever trying psychedelics. I was very nervous, but kind of excited. So I packed up some things and went to the local park. I brought snacks, a blanket, and I was originally gonna stay there the entire trip. I drove there, took the shrooms, set a timer for about 6.5 hours, and I walked around the hiking trails. I found this beautiful trail I had never been on before, and I tried to just be at peace and relax. I turned on some music and just let it all settle over me. After I walked, I went and sat on my blanket when everything started to look wavy and colors got very vivid. I had tried to journal, but it was kind of overwhelming, and it started to make me panic. I felt like in my gut I needed to get home. I packed my things and got in the car. Driving was an awful idea, admittedly, but I'm so glad I decided to get home. As I was pulling onto my street, everything started to flatten, which I had heard about before, but until then, I never realized what anyone had meant. I made it inside and sat down on the couch to let it take over, but at this point, it had really only been about 45 minutes since I ate the shrooms, which I never would have known if I didn't set a timer. As I was sitting on my couch, I looked up at the ceiling, and I had an overlay of patterns over everything in my vision. The walls started to breathe. Everything was just colorful and spinning. It was beautiful. I heard a low humming in my ears, and the real sounds around me were phasing in and out. I decided to get up and look in the mirror. My face was covered in colorful patterns, and it started to melt and mold into different shapes. My pupils went huge, and they almost took up the entire part of the color in my eyes. I started to feel nauseous and dizzy, but I was having fun. I decided to go lay down and just let it take over. And that's when it fully kicked in. I lost complete track of time. Colors and patterns were swirling, my room was moving, I heard music in my ears even though there was nothing playing, and it was just fully overwhelming. Finally, I turned on some real music and just lost it. I had no physical sensations at all. No touch, I couldn't even feel myself breathing, but I did have an overwhelming feeling that it was all gonna be okay. At some point during all of this, I apparently turned the music off, and I just began to listen to silence. There was this overwhelmingly heavenly but also terrifying music that began to play, completely unlike anything I'd ever heard. It was melodic. If I had to compare it to anything, it would be more like throat singing, and in the background was kind of a low, calming hum. I melted into my bed and lost consciousness as far as I think. But in my mind, I was in some infinite reality where time didn't exist. I felt like I was living many realities at once, many lives simultaneously, but then nothing at all, just void. All I could hear was the music. I just kept whispering to myself over and over, the music, the music. I felt like I couldn't close my eyes, but while writing this, I can't even remember anything that was visual about this. While I was in this void, I felt like I had died, but I felt so far from God, infinitely lonely and sad. I called for God, but all I felt was complete solitude, like I was cast out and ignored. I started to quote unquote wake up because I heard my landlord moving around, and that made me panic because for some reason I worried he was hurt. I was so worried, but I knew I couldn't help him in this state. I blacked out again, and I just started feeling so sad. I wanted my ex. I wanted to be held and comforted, told everything was going to be okay. I missed him infinitely. I hadn't been near him in hundreds of years, it felt like I was completely forgotten. I hadn't felt love for all eternity, and I just wanted comfort. But then all of a sudden, I felt like I was a part of him, and he was me, and I finally wasn't alone. But then it all faded again, and I was sad. I got up and went to the bathroom, and I looked at myself, and my body began to age. I saw myself grow old and young, but old again, over and over. As my face morphed and melted, I started to panic again. I sat on the floor and I began crying. I just wanted comfort. All I wanted was someone to talk to. I wanted to be loved, and I cried for God. I started to sob, and I just couldn't stop. I finally got up and moved to the couch, wrapped myself in a heated blanket, and I cried for what felt like years to me. When I finally warmed up, I felt the most overpowering, beautiful love. It felt like God was finally here, holding me and loving me. I felt calm, and I finally began to feel at peace. I turned on the TV in the background, and all I can describe is just love. I felt love for everyone that I'd ever met or interacted with, love for all the animals, and love for myself for the first time in a long time. I felt like I was finally seeing humanity through God's eyes, and I was finally able to see myself through his as well. During all of this, I was gifted so much knowledge, so much wisdom, and nothing but overwhelming clarity. I finally knew my faith was real and that I was infinitely loved. I was assured that I made the right choices in life and that I was finally in the right place, safe and on the right track, which gave me the courage to get up and take a shower. And finally, when I looked at myself, I saw that I was beautiful and saw that I deserved love. As I finally came down, I was out of breath, just lied on the couch and watched TV about all of these things, all of the knowledge that I was given. I still need to process, but honestly, this was exactly what I needed in this moment.